Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode about Vuex, and in this episode we're going to particularly talk about what things you'd want to do with Vuex and what things you don't want to do with Vuex. Okay, so first of all I want to take a look at the app here and the way we basically use this computed property, and we use this getter here. So it's all nice that we have this getter, and all we're doing is we're just returning this state, right? Thing is, we can access this state directly through through the store, through Vuex, so we don't actually need the getter. So let's take a look at how we can do that. What we can do is we can say state profiles. Let's remove this, save this, refresh, go to our home, and you can see that we are still getting this list of profiles. So essentially, we don't actually need this getter right here. We can just access the profiles straight away. Okay, next thing I want to talk about are the helpers. So Vuex provides you with some helpers, and these helpers help you map functions. So we want to import some functions from Vuex. So Vuex, and we want to import for now. This is an action, so there is a helper called map actions. All right. So what we would do is we would say methods. So here what we want to do is we want to destructure the map actions helper, and what we can do is we can pass an array of strings, and then this array, what we can do is we can specify the name of our method that we want to pass here, right? So then all we would have to do is call this load profiles, and we're going to pass this API to it. So let's comment this out and let's refresh this. So here you can see that the profiles are still getting loaded. Now, I tend to not use this notation. I tend to always, it may seem like an extra step, but I find it a little bit more readable. So I tend to limit the names, these capital size names, to basically understand that this is something that's coming from Vuex, all right? And I tend to create proper functions. So to create a proper function, you, instead of an array, you want to use an object, and what you're going to do is then type in the name of the function. So load profiles, like so. And now instead of this, we just access this function. So let's refresh, and there we go. This may seem like extra code, but I'm showing at this point it's extra code. Once you have a few actions, then this becomes a really neat way of organizing your Vuex functions that you Vuex actions and mutations that you have in there. Okay, next thing, let's go into our profile, and I want to take care of this bit right here. So at the moment, you can see that we're sort of either returning null, and then basically once we have loaded our profiles, that's when we have this big list, and we're going to be passing the name, basically filtering it by name. So what I would prefer to do is to delegate this kind of task to my store. So let's go ahead in here and let's create a getter, and let's call it get profile. And this is going to look a little bit the same. So it's going to be the state, but what it's going to evaluate to is actually a function. So we're going to say name that we're passing, and like so. Okay, so this may be a little bit confusing, but basically when we get profile, we're going to populate the state and it's going to return this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to return, and actually I don't think we'll need these curly brackets. All we can do is basically say state profiles filter. Let's just be verbose. So profile dot first name equals name, and I'll get the first. Okay, just like so. Let me see if I can drop this to a new line. I can. Nice. All right. So let's try to get this profile in our profile here. So instead of get profile, since we no longer have this function, let's drop this down here and let's say name, and we're just going to return this, and I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete this. All right, now let's click on one of these, and we're getting an error because I have misspelled filter. Refresh this, and there we go. So you can see that we have essentially cleaned this up a little bit. We can take this a step further and use MapGetters as well. So this is a similar function to map actions, but we are mapping getters instead. So let's go ahead and say map getters. And again, in this example, it seems like we're cluttering up because we only have one getter, and maybe you don't want to use map getters when you only have one getter, and you want to basically stay in this, stay with this option. But once you have like a few getters and you're getting them like this, you might want to use the MapGetters helper, and it works the same. So we are going to destructure this. Again, you can either pass an array and use the big name to access that function, and you know that I do prefer to create a function and assign it to this name here. And then what I can do is basically return this, get profile, and let's just pass the name here, like so. Okay, now we have this. We are basically sort of cleaning things up. And next thing, what I would like to take care of is the modularity side of Vuex. So at the moment we have this one profiles, and this is taking care of profiles. So how I tend to take this approach, and is I create a new folder, and I call it modules. All right, I'm gonna move in my profiles into there. Yes, and move it, and oh, let me close all this. And in my store, in the root folder, similar to how we register our generic components, we have this index.js. I'm gonna just go ahead and create a new file, and I'm gonna call it store.js. Okay, and this is where I am going to, let me close this, let me close the profile. This is where I'm basically going to, again, do this little bit here, like so. And let me copy this as well. Let me copy the whole thing, actually. All right, I'm going to remove the comments since I don't need them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all this state here. And instead of creating state, etc., I'm going to type in modules. All right, so now that we have this modules, I'm going to go ahead and import my profiles module. So I'm going to call it profile from modules profiles. And let's actually change it to profiles. I'm going to go ahead and add it to these modules. And what I can do here is, and here I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these, so I no longer need them. I'm going to export default object, like so. Okay, and make sure I don't forget to remove this bracket here. Okay, next thing in the store, let me just double check that I got everything. Yep. And now in my main.js, what I want to do is I want to point to this store, this main store import rather than my profiles. All right. So one thing you will notice is that basically profiles here broke. So let's take a look. Let me close all of that. So the main issue here will be that it doesn't know what profiles are in this state, because now we're sort of we have this store and a module. So the before the profile was sort of global state. Now that state belongs to this module. So what we will have to do is navigate to the profiles. So the reason we're doing .profiles is because we have profiles here, and basically what we're doing is this. So instead, what we might want to do is say p, and then when we want to access it, we can say .p.profiles, right? So just so you don't get too confused about where this profile is coming from, it's basically just the name of the module. So we have state, name of the module, and the property in this module. Okay, so is there actually a way to simplify this? And yes, the answer is yes, we can. So let's go ahead to our import from Vuex, and let's get our map state helper, right? And what we can do here is we can go to computers, same as before. We do the map state shindig right here. And let's do something along the line of profiles. And what we're going to do is we're going to bind state, and we're going to say state.profiles.profiles, right? So we're basically moving this up to here. So if we go ahead, remove this, save this, we give it this a refresh, so you can see we still have our list here, and not much has changed. Now, let's say you might have something like this. You might have a few properties, and you basically have this duplication of basically the module that you get. But essentially, you want to keep this structure if you're mapping state from different modules. But at the moment, we only have one module. So the way we can resolve this problem is in our module here, we can say namespace true, right? So we're basically attaching some namespace, but you can see here that load profiles is broken because of this, and we will fix this in a minute. So what we want to do now is we want to specify the namespace for this. So we can go ahead and say profiles and comma here. And now we no longer need to mention this profiles here. All right, and same thing we want to do in map actions, profiles, copy, and there we go. So now essentially if we have many properties in our state, we can basically do something like this and just basically say which property we're getting. If we have multiple modules, we might want to do something like this and say another module. Right, but we don't have another module here. These are just some thoughts that you might want to ponder about. Let's go ahead into our home. Actually, I forgot that we have some access to our Vuex here, and you can see here that we have this action here. Now, what we can do is, you see how we're posting to the API and then we're committing to our store. What we can do is we can just move this action along into our store here. So let's go ahead and say create profile, and what we want here is we want the commit, so we are going to be writing to our store. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a payload. So we're going to have a form, and we are going to have the API. So in here, we can destructure the API and the form from the payload. Okay, and what we're going to do is let me close all of this stuff. I'm going to go into my home. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to do this. I don't have the loading here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. I'm going to return this promise from the API, and then I can basically cancel the loading here. So this form, I'm going to change it to just the form, which I'm going to destructure here. The result, yeah, I'm gonna keep the result. I can remove this store, commit, and there we go. So now what we can do is I'm gonna go ahead and again follow this not follow. I'm gonna basically just bring in my map actions. I'm gonna go into my methods. I'm gonna destructure map actions. I'm gonna basically copy the name for this here, and I am gonna take this create profile. I'm gonna put it here, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically comment this part out. I'm also going to do something with this loading property. I'm actually gonna move it to my module here, since this action is now happening within the module, so it makes sense to move this to into this module, right? So I'm gonna say creating profile. I'm just gonna start with false. And when I add the profile, I'm gonna go into my state. I'm gonna say creating profile equals false, and I'm gonna also create another mutation, which is gonna basically say that I'm starting to create my profile. All right. So set creating profile. Set state status state dot creating profile. I probably don't even need this, since this is basically gonna basically say always true. So then I can basically say start creating profile, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically call commit, and I'm gonna say start creating profile. Right, now that I don't actually need to return anything anymore, what I can do is basically create a computer property that will basically take care of this for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a map state. Same as before. I'm gonna go ahead and call this loading, same as it is now. So I'm gonna comment this out, and this was named start, not this, but rather creating profile. Actually, this is not how we do. We do it by calling state first. Okay, let's not forget to specify the modules, or rather, sorry, module namespace. We want to do the same for our action here, like so. And when we create our profile, right here on click, we want to pass something to it. So what we want to do is we want to pass in our API, and we want to pass in our form. Okay, let me just put a space here. And let's double check that it all works. So new one, I'll give us a 19, female, hello world, 2, create profile. And there we go. So one thing is something has broken on our profile. So let's take a look at this. And again, we will have to specify the namespace here. And there we go. So let's go ahead and clean this up. Let me delete this. Let me delete this loading. And there we go. So this will be it for this episode. Hopefully I have introduced some new knowledge to you. So now you know how to have a centralized sort of container for your Vuex modules, and you know that a Vuex module should centralize data across a few components, and you can use these helpers to basically map certain actions, mutations, state. I don't think I covered a mutation here, but essentially, if you ever need to just mutate something like this, it's the same as mapping your action. you would just bring in map mutations and do the same thing as map actions. So you would put it into your methods. So basically from this episode, you should get away with knowing how to create your map actions, your map state, basically how to utilize the namespace and all that good jazz, and basically how to go ahead and extract the functionality from your components, and basically being able to distinguish between component functionality, which is basically how an input would only take care of this input here. It has nothing. It has no idea that it's being part of this form filling, right? So it can either be a first name, it can be a last name. It takes care of its delegation. The store, this module's responsibility is to basically keep the hold the information of the store profile. So we're either creating a profile if there is some sort of action already being taking place. So we can basically update one of the components with like a little loading thing. But basically everything in this module is relating to this collection of profiles, and basically everything's around updating it and getting the information from this profile. So none of these components manipulate this profiles or creating profiles. Everything is done from within this module. These components are just essentially calling methods of this module. Okay, so hopefully enough rambling on. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe. It will help out my channel a lot. If you have any questions, always leave them in the comments. I like answering your questions. And as always, see you in the next episode.